Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Hao-Chen Sun. I'm Director of the Law and Technology Center at the Faculty of Law, University of Hong Kong. Today, we're very delighted to have Professor Daphné Richemond-Barak give a webinar on the topic of artificial intelligence and security affairs. This is such an important topic. As many of you know, artificial intelligence involves the usage of wealth of information. So keeping the security of data is one of the key concerns for today's development of artificial intelligence. And in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, information security has become more important than ever. So we're very delighted to have Professor Richemond-Barak give today's webinar. So let me briefly introduce Professor Richemond-Barak. She is currently a law professor at Israel, and she has published law articles in the leading journals, and she is the author of a very important book, Underground Warfare, published by Oxford University Press. So let me invite Professor Daphné Richemond-Barak to join today's webinar. How are you, Daphné? How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Hong Kong University.
It's our delight. How are you? How is the COVID-19 situation in Israel?
Oh, so in Israel, we had a lockdown like everywhere else, and now we're slowly getting back to normal. We're still teaching via Zoom, and our semester is not yet over, but we're doing well altogether.
I know that it's early morning time in Israel, so thank you so much. Would you like to start now?
Sure, I'm happy to start now. And again, I want to thank the Law and Tech Center at the HKU Law School for having me today, and Professor Hao-Chen Sun, you've been so welcoming to me, and it's really an honor to be associated with your center. I'd also like to thank Gracie Chan for all of her hard work and support over the past few months. And you know, I was supposed to deliver this lecture in February in person, but unfortunately the outbreak of COVID-19 made it impossible for me to come. So I'm very glad that we're able to do this via Zoom today. And I see a lot of friends and colleagues in attendance, including many experts on AI. So I want to thank you all for being here today. And if you can turn on your videos, it would be great. This way I'll be able to see you as well, and not just your names. And I look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts in the Q&A sessions later on or in future conversations. So now let me begin. I will be now sharing my presentation so we can start. Okay, so today I'll be talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on security affairs. And it's a topic that, as you said, is critical because there's no doubt that artificial intelligence has revolutionized many sectors of activity, from manufacturing to online commerce, and of course the medical world, and this is very important, of course, in the era of a pandemic. Cognitive technologies have been used to help companies grow and enhance their productivity. And generally, if you look at the way consultants and business and finance experts are talking about AI in that world, they view AI-powered tools generally favorably in the business world. And this contrasts very sharply with the way AI is generally perceived in the scholarly literature in general on security and in the context of the military in particular. And the contrast is all the more surprising when you see that the discussion on the use of artificial intelligence in war and in security has been limited for the most part and for many years to the use of cognitive technologies in autonomous weapons, also known as killer robots. This conversation, which has focused almost exclusively on the legality of such weapons, autonomous weapons, and the dangers of delegating decision-making to robots, especially, of course, if robots are to make decisions on their own. Assigning responsibility for mistakes. There's a whole lot of ethical and legal questions that arise from the use of autonomous weapons. And of course, none of what I'm about to say is to undermine in any way the importance of this issue. But what I want to highlight today is that the issue of autonomous weapons is really only the tip of the iceberg. And there's many uses of AI whose impact certainly doesn't fall short of that of autonomous weapons, and yet that have remained underexplored, underanalyzed in the scholarly literature. And I want to tell you that oftentimes I hear that, what is the point of looking at all the breadth of the impact of AI, since states, may not make use of all of the possibilities. They may limit themselves either by ethical standards or legal standards. And the point that I want to make today is that even states that choose to limit their use of AI technology for ethical or other reasons, they must understand how their enemies are likely to use AI to prevail on the battlefield of the future. So most of the literature, as I said, doesn't go that far and continues to focus on autonomous weapons. There are a few scholars who stand out by broadening the discourse, and they've stand out over the years. And here I want to name a few: Ryan Callow, Rita Konaev, Larry Lewis, David Horowitz, Steve Hill, Noam Lubel. They've all worked and highlighted aspects of AI that go beyond autonomous weapons. So it's not that such scholarship does not exist, but it remains very limited. And of course, the list that I just gave is not an exhaustive list. So in my presentation today, I want to advocate for a holistic approach to AI in security and military affairs that accounts for AI's wide-ranging impact on military logistics, on decision-making, on intelligence gathering, and more. And this holistic approach does two main things. First, it reveals the limits of the discourse that has been too heavily focused on autonomous weapons. And I'll explain that in a minute. And second, it exposes the risk of overlooking AI's positive impact on security and military affairs. Ultimately, the point of my conceptual framework, of my proposition, is to think broader and to have an approach to AI that acknowledges its positive impact alongside its flaws or its dangers, of course. Just as AI is transforming the business world, as I've said in my introduction, it holds the potential of having a positive impact on traditional security and military practices. So that's what we need to uncover. Of course, this impact of AI, even though in a scholarly community we've been a bit slow to catch the wave, this is not lost on states. States have heavily invested on AI. China wishes to become a leading nation, AI nation by 2030. The US has developed an American strategy for AI. The US Congress in the United States has established a National Security Commission on AI in 2018. And I want to here actually congratulate the Commission, because that step has been fundamental in generating groundbreaking research with the added benefit of a cooperation with War on the Rocks, actually, and has enhanced the visibility of this growing body of literature that goes beyond killer robots. In the legal world, I have to say, this is not yet as visible. So AI is also emerging as a crucial pillar of European defense capabilities, funding and decision-making. The EU is increasingly viewing AI as a strategic enabler. It's invested in AI via Horizon 2020 grants, but also investments in startups, and in general, a commitment to addressing the ethical questions that are no less important. And in 2018, interestingly, 25 European countries signed a declaration of cooperation on AI, which I think is remarkable. And I want to here also highlight Germany, who has been a leading, was also been investing considerable amounts of money in this field. Of course, this wouldn't go without a mention on Russia and Vladimir Putin's infamous remark in 2017 when he said that whoever becomes a leader in AI, of course, will become the ruler of the world. So I think in terms of the states understanding the meaning and the impact, the far-reaching impact on AI, that doesn't leave any doubt. But the fear is that these major investments, and in turn, of course, a greater reliance on AI, will trigger an escalation in the international arena, will trigger an arms race, and possibly culminate with the advent of machine-driven wars. Now, of course, the question that I'm asking myself is why AI warrants such concerns more than any other weapons or new technologies. And I think it's important to reflect on this question, but it goes beyond the scope of this research, so I'll just leave it aside for now. So now let me show you this diagram, which offers a novel conceptualization of AI, as I promised I would do, which is cognizant of AI's multifaceted uses and its hybrid appeal. And I will explain to that what I mean in just a second. So I want to show, I want to tell you that the conversation here should begin with where the civilian and military world meet. And you see here two outer circles. So let me present the diagram. There's the inner circle, which is the core military business, what the military does, stricto sensu, okay? And then the two outer circles, decision-making and civilian protection, are where the civilian and military world meet and where AI basically transcends the civilian and military divide. So I will be speaking about the two outer circles first, and then I'll turn to the core of military activity and the inner circle of the diagram, where AI impacts and we can see it here, all aspects of war, from logistical support to human enhancement and information warfare, and of course weaponry, which is of course where the focus has been so far and where I think we should try to expand the debate. So the conceptual framework that you have in front of you and I'm about to analyze with you stresses the hybrid nature of AI. That is, when I mean hybrid, I mean civilian and military, and the duality of AI's application. And this is a point that I will be going back to in a few minutes. AI being used both for good applications and for bad applications in the context of security, just like all technologies before it. So if AI can do good, and this is something that Google has been promoting in other areas of AI uses, it might be able also to limit the devastating impact of war. And I think this is an important piece of this debate, which we have to consider. So let me begin with decision-making and civilian protection, like I said, the two outer circles. So on the decision-making side, here, AI will progressively, and it is, I think, evident, penetrate decision-making processes in the civilian and the military spheres, either on its own or more likely, perhaps, as part of a complex human-machine interaction. It will be very hard to keep track of AI's penetration of the decision-making processes here because AI increases the speed of war. It shrinks the time that's available to military commanders, but not just military commanders, also diplomats and decision makers to deal with mounting escalation or the beginning of a conflict. So AI will increase the speed of war and the time available to make decisions, and all types of decisions, both military and civilian decisions. It's interesting because in our daily lives, we don't always realize the extent to which AI influences, kind of calls the shots in our daily decision-making as to where to eat or what dress to purchase. So we don't realize that AI has penetrated our decision-making processes individually. And I think what is going to happen is in the security and military world is very similar. AI-powered systems will increasingly and progressively make their way into decision-making processes, but not always in the most apparent or the most obvious way. It's a process that eventually will be welcome because it will serve the needs of its users, just like Siri, Alexa, Amazon serve our needs on a daily basis. And the temptation will be great to outsource decisions to AI or have AI assist in decision making. And these decisions are grave though. They go much further than just buying a pair of shoes or a new phone, right? It's about whether or not to go to war, whether to escalate an interaction with another state. It's about assisting in the proportionality calculus in targeting or how to approach the next stage of battle. So just like us empowered customers, we can expect military commanders and decision makers alike to be tempted and to find it convenient to gain the assistance of AI in a tailored way. But as we talk about decision making, let's not forget that AI is often prone to bias and prejudice. And there's been a huge amount of research in this field, of course. So we don't want AI to discriminate based on race or ethnicity or discriminate against minority groups. And here it raises an important question about whether AI will be able to properly identify allies and adversaries on the battlefield, and whether human commanders might want to perhaps restrict AI autonomy and trust. So all of these are very important questions that have to do with decision making. And of course, like all of the items that I'm going to examine as part of this conceptual framework, they all are a world unto themselves, with scholars focusing on them and developing them. So I'm touching upon them to show the scope and the breadth of this impact, not necessarily going into all the details. But I want to say one last thing about decision making, and this is about alliances. As states determine how much AI they want to use and how much they want to rely on AI, how much they want to trust AI, and how transparent or how much they want to share using AI, this will prove very challenging, I believe, in multinational operations when states have to work together and in alliances in general. So this is the part on decision making, and I'm going to go now into the question of civilian protection. This is arguably the most important aspect, and I'll tell you why. It is because it is the most likely to be overlooked if we continue focusing on killer robots. AI cannot be conceived merely as a way to enhance military capabilities. And this is where I put the emphasis on AI for good, even in the context of conflict and definitely in the context of disasters and national emergencies. AI-powered tools can help wars be more humane as well. So if they haven't done so yet, the tech-savvy military powers that should use technology to enhance the protection of civilians in time of war and reduce war's impact on the most vulnerable. So beyond targeting and beyond precision and beyond weaponization lies AI's potential for good. And channeling this AI towards more humanitarian aims can take many forms, from reducing errors in targeting to improving collateral damage assessments and evacuating affected civilians from the zones of conflict. What's really interesting is that a lot of this has already been discussed, but not in the context of war. It's been discussed in the context of humanitarian relief and disaster and civilian emergencies, and much less so in the context of armed conflict. Steve Hill, who used to be the legal advisor of NATO, recently published an article in which he shared that NATO-led exercises have shown that AI can be useful in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief by enabling the processing of aerial images of a disaster site and tend to victims more efficiently. So this can be done via machine learning as well, processing textual messages and also imagery data. And of course, then humanitarian organizations have actionable data on which they can rely to tend to the affected population. This can also come in the form of delivery of essential goods and medical supplies to hard-to-reach or heavily affected areas. So, of course, AI has the potential to enhance disaster management, the prediction of disaster, and of course, identification of missing persons with the help of facial recognition, perhaps. But what's interesting, again, is that though all of these applications of AI have been envisaged and considered in the realm of disaster relief, their use is not contemplated with the same seriousness in the military context. So sophisticated armies that have the capabilities to do that should consider the use of AI-powered systems to enhance civilian protection in wartime. I want to say a few more things about this aspect because I think, again, it's the one that's least discussed in the literature. However, there is one scholar who since 2017, which is relatively early, Larry Lewis, he has shown that AI can help reduce civilian casualties and enhance the protection of hospitals in particular, and reduce the margin of error here And here one thinks about the tragic targeting of the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, by US forces in 2015. So AI can help, and Larry Lewis has shown that in trying to limit these errors and to enhance the protection of civilians. So it's about time that states, all states, that are able to implement some of these findings and for the scholarly community to publicize them and to analyze them. In a complex urban environment where civilian and military targets coexist in dense terrain, AI-powered systems offer a unique promise in my view. I think particularly about smart cities and the breadth of the data that's available on sanitation, on water, on electricity supply, and of course the location of schools and all sorts of other protected objects. This is a unique opportunity to protect those objects in a time of conflict. Assuming they can be made available, these data points on civilian targets could be used to block civilian targets, such as schools or medical facilities, from even being targeted. And so then maybe a special authorization could be gained or could be attained in order to override the system and allow the targeting of such protected objects. So that is a way in which AI could be used. And of course, as AI becomes more explainable, and here I, of course, paraphrase DARPA's famous project on Explainable AI, the process of target identification and verification could become much more transparent to the end user and therefore much more implementable. Let me now turn to the core of military activities that AI affects. And as you see here, there are many quarters on this pie, and only one of them is the weaponry. Only one of them is autonomous weapons. So, so this is what I want to focus on. I want to talk about knowing the enemy. How does AI impact the ability of a state to know its enemy better? And here what I'm going to do is to think about what AI does in the civilian world, in its general applications, and try to extrapolate to understand how AI is likely to be used in a military context using those same applications. So as you know, AI is being used to analyze and uncover customer attitudes. Brands, marketing efforts are based on understanding how we feel vis-a-vis certain products. And this is done with great accuracy thanks to the processing of information, sentiment analysis, and natural language processing tools. And so imagine the same being done by an adversary, by a state about its adversary, used to assess the concerns, the morale, the moods of an opponent. This is essentially the same or the equivalent, the modern equivalent of spying or intelligence gathering. But I call it knowing your enemy because it achieves greater accuracy and in real time, even in the dynamic battlefield conditions. AI might be able to provide this unique picture of how the enemy feels, of what the enemy is planning and what the enemy is worried about. Assessing the enemy's will to fight, its preparedness, maybe thanks to these tools, taking the enemy by surprise will even become easier. It will allow states to uncover the answers to questions such as, what are the leaders, the civilians, and the combatants concerned about at this moment? What are their most glaring weaknesses and fears? So AI will enable a much deeper and more nuanced and more refined and more accurate understanding into the enemy, into its strength and into its weaknesses. Let me move on to logistics and maintenance, which is another aspect of this core military business. Okay, you see the little pie here on the diagram. So logistics and maintenance could seem kind of menial and perhaps less important, but I think we can't avoid discussing it. It is the core military business, and it will be affected, if it is already affected, by the AI revolution, if you wish. The revolution in procurement processes and supply chains. AI being enhancing inter-unit cooperation by matching soldiers to units where they are most needed. and better allocating funding to various units. So just like AI makes businesses more efficient, AI can make the military and does make the military more efficient. It also enables the automation of certain tasks, which is slightly different than AI, but still currently performed by soldiers. So Jonathan Clifford gives a really interesting example of an AI-enabled logistics system capable of tracking fuel usage of an unmanned aerial vehicle. And he imagines that an AI-enabled robot would then refuel and communicate to the team that the mission is complete, having refueled this aerial vehicle. So it would be an AI-powered system that identifies the need for more fuel, and an AI-powered system that would refuel and then communicate to the team that it has been done. So this is, of course, making the military more efficient, and it has to be part of our discussion. But don't forget, and this is important for all of the aspects that I'm discussing today, that AI systems also make the military more vulnerable to attacks and to capture of AI systems. So therefore, just like the military envisaged the capture of drones and other weapon systems by the enemy, it needs to also reflect upon what will happen if AI systems are captured or compromised by the enemy. I'm moving on to the next piece of the pie here in the core military business of what I've set out to be this new conceptualization of AI's impact on security. The next, this piece of the pie here is human enhancement. And other people, by the way, call it performance optimization, which is certainly less intimidating than talking about enhancing humans, right? So what is the need to enhance humans, and why is this part of what AI will be doing in the future? So human soldiers are by nature limited. The knowledge cannot be transferred to them electronically or out of them. And what can I say? They can easily die, and that is one of their main weaknesses. In comparison, enhanced soldiers will be again more efficient, less subject to exhaustion, anxiety, and errors. AI-enhanced soldiers are able to withstand major blood loss or extreme fatigue or even extreme temperatures. So they are more resistant and they are less vulnerable. This is one of the areas where I see the most legal and ethical questions arising. And there might be a need here for hard, fast, black letter rules to regulate this area, which is becoming more and more real. So the use of cyborg, of these enhanced individuals on the battlefield, they won't necessarily look like cyborgs. They may look like a perfectly normal human soldier. So what do we do if this enhancement is not visible to the naked eye? And is there a difference between a soldier that's been given amphetamines and caffeine, which is very common in war, and a soldier that has a brain insert, or perhaps a soldier whose brain hasn't been modified, but just stimulated prior to military engagement? Does it make a difference if it's the brain or if it's the body that's been enhanced? Does it matter what type of enhancement we're talking about? These are very, very relevant questions which are coming up in as the military uses AI to create these enhanced soldiers. Let me bring up perhaps one legal issue that I think is interesting and that comes to mind. The laws of war afford soldiers protection from the infliction of unnecessary suffering. And what amounts for unnecessary suffering, of course, has been developed and has been analyzed in the context of human soldiers. But what would be the infliction of unnecessary suffering onto an enhanced soldier? Does an enhanced soldier truly suffer? And does it suffer at the same threshold as a human soldier? Additional questions arise with respect to the ability or the autonomy of a soldier to refuse a particular enhancement, the responsibility of enhanced soldiers for their actions. Are they still capable of being responsible for what they do, given that they've been modified? Perhaps at some point where the modification reaches a certain level, these enhanced soldiers should be treated not as soldiers anymore, but as means of warfare under the law of armed conflict. And I think it's really interesting, and this goes beyond the law, how will these enhanced soldiers interact with regular soldiers, and how will they be taught to uphold military values vis-a-vis their comrades? So while I'm saying all of this, it's important to note that in any event, contemporary studies now show that modern machines are still incapable of replacing humans, and we're unlikely to see machines that are truly superior to humans, at least for a little while to go. And particularly when it comes to creative thinking and analyzing a complex set of circumstances or geopolitical environment. So I think the future here is more, and I think this is truly where states are currently investing their effort, human-machine teaming with human control more dominant than the machine's autonomy, and the integration of AI-powered systems and enhanced soldiers somehow into the chain of command. So it might take some time before we see human-machine confrontation and a complete retreat of human soldiers from the battlefield. Let me move to the last piece of this discussion, information warfare. So, of course, each of these aspects, and I've seen this or said this already, is a world of study unto its own. But for our purposes here, I think it's important to note that AI can both exacerbate and mitigate information warfare. And this, again, shows this duality of artificial intelligence being, on one hand, a boost to new developments in the battlefield that potentially have bad applications or bad effects on security, and this would still have to be defined. And on the other hand, the ability to use AI to counter some of these developments. So here it's the same story, right? AI is both a boost to information warfare and at the same time, perhaps the solution to identifying bots and to stopping the spread of fake news. But as AI-powered tools become more sophisticated, it is evident that we are going to see mass influence operations on a more frequent basis. And these operations will reach more people and more rapidly and more efficiently with less time for counter operations. What we're likely to see as well is AI being used to micro-target individuals and groups, which are the most vulnerable to manipulation and disinformation. So not just on a mass scale, but also actually pinpointed operations. This will lead, of course, to this use of fake news and deep fakes and bots, manipulates public perceptions, can polarize public opinion, and altogether it can take military deception and the fog of war to entirely new levels. So this is not, of course, just in time of elections. I'm not talking here about elections. I'm talking about war and conflict, where there's no time to verify the veracity of pictures and events, and decisions will be made based on these pictures and these posts. And this can have a major destabilizing effect. And I'm thinking particularly actually in alliances, how this could be used to play out members of alliances such as NATO, for example, against each other. So there's a great deal that decision makers, both in the civilian and the military world, need to be get accustomed to, working under high pressure to make decisions, and in conditions of heightened uncertainty, even worse than in general in the context of war and confrontation. At the same, what I think I want to conclude with here is that this piece of the pie, this information warfare piece, is a piece where we're likely to see more AI used to counter AI-powered information warfare. So more AI to counter the use of AI, to detect bots and to stop the spread of fake news, for example, identify, right, in forensics, AI can also be used to that end. So I'm now nearing my conclusion. I would like to suggest that perhaps there's a piece of the pie here that is missing, and that would be nuclear strategy and nuclear aspects of war. And here, some scholars have already highlighted the relevance of AI-related technologies in the realm of nuclear deterrence and strategic stability. I think this is crucial, and it remains to be seen whether in the realm of security affairs, AI will truly change as well this the careful equilibrium that exists in terms of nuclear capabilities and the use of nuclear weapons. So we can only hope that in here the humans remain the dominant actor in decision making, and that this is not being outsourced to machines, because it could definitely heighten the risk of destruction, nuclear conflict, etc. So I would like to conclude here before we turn to our Q&A session. I've suggested here a framework to think about the impact of AI on security and military affairs. This is a very fragmented field of study. It's relatively new. In many ways, it has yet to uncover all of these aspects in depth. And so here we have a kind of a blueprint, a context within which we can discuss AI and all of the impact of AI that goes beyond killer robots, and adopt and embrace a more nuanced approach to AI. This is what I'm promoting, at least, which considers both the positive impact of AI and also its disruptive effects. So the good and the bad, that's the duality, but as well as the hybrid character of AI that transcends the divide between civilian and military affairs, and goes beyond the military sphere stricto sensu. So hopefully this conceptual framework will be helpful to those of us who research AI and wish to examine and its far-reaching impact. So I thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Daphne, for such a fascinating talk. So let's move on to Q&A. And when I was listening to your talk, a few things occurred to me earlier. So first of all, I could still recall that Elon Musk, Tesla CEO, and our fantastic guy who is planning to send us to the Mars, actually has cautioned that AI could be the cause of the next World War. And I was very surprised when I saw his comment. But after hearing about your talk, I'm no longer that surprised, because it seems that this kind of, the next, the future war involving the usage of killer robots and AI is actually not at our doorsteps, but it might be coming in the near future. So second thing I was thinking is about the driverless cars, autonomous driving vehicles. So it seems that this is such a huge development for our future, but this idea itself, having all our cars being powered by AI, and also without drivers, human drivers I'm talking about, and this is a great development. But somehow everything has been developed, is being developed without a legal framework to regulate issues or accidents, such as, for example, if there's a car accident, who should be responsible for the accident? So something is similar to, I think, to your topic. For example, if killer robots or the use of AI cause very severe humanitarian disasters, who should be responsible for causing the disaster? So these are the things that came into my mind. And so I have two short questions. The first one is about whether we have any nascent discussion about having international treaties. We can draft new international treaties, for example, to govern the use of AI in warfare in the future. Is there any discussion about regulating this kind of technology in the warfare? The second question is about whether the nature of future wars, so you mentioned earlier that this kind of warfares will occur, for example, among countries or different groups of human beings. It's pretty much like a human-controlled warfare still. We human beings use AI, but it seems to me that there is another kind of warfare that might occur in the future. We human beings might end up fighting or having wars with robots. Robots, if they're developed well enough, they might have their own, for example, armed forces to fight against we human beings. So if that occurs, how shall we cope with it? So let me quickly tell the audience. I've just asked questions, so while Daphne respond to my question, feel free to type in your question in the chat box. We already have a lot of questions, so I'll pick some of them later on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your questions and your engagement on this topic. And I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat. I hope I'll have a chance to take a look in a minute. So yes, I think AI definitely holds the potential in it to create escalations, to trigger escalation, and to lead to military confrontation, even traditional military confrontation, because there has been either a mistake that was made in the interpretation of some data that was received, or because maybe an AI-powered weapon has been used in a way that was not initially envisaged. So there is definitely much room for mistakes and for problems. But I think part of what I want to do is show the other side as well, right? I'm not trying to minimize the dangers, but I want the conversation to be holistic in a sense that it doesn't completely overlook the other part where AI can help in limiting the impact of war on civilians, for example. So yes, there is a potential for great, perhaps even World War III, like Elon Musk has been saying, but at the same time, there's also potential. And again, this is nothing new to AI. It's the same with all technologies that have been developed over the, over the last hundreds of years. So autonomous cars, it's very interesting that you ask about this because, again, I think the key to understanding how war is going to change is, of course, by being, by understanding how war works and how wars end and how wars begin. But it's also about seeing and witnessing and observing what is happening outside of war with AI. And again, extrapolating that to the military world and try to ask ourselves if AI can be used to anticipate employee burnout in a large company, how can that same AI application, how can that same application of perhaps natural language or sentiment analysis, how can that be then used by an adversary who has the capability in a civilian world and implemented in a military context? So I think so what is happening with autonomous cars is very interesting, both the legal questions and of course the mistakes, again, the mistakes that are being made. And perhaps eventually when the technology gets better, autonomous cars will truly bring down the amount of car accidents and casualties on the road. Definitely it would be useful in Israel because we have major problems with traffic accidents here that cause a lot of casualties every single year. So again, with each technology comes this positive and this duality of impact. But for some reason, when we talk about AI and we talk about war, that has not been part so much of the conversation. Now, how about treaty? Look, there has been a conversation within the United Nations and some existing treaties relevant to the use of autonomous lethal weapons. But the conversation there, which has been going on for a decade, has been exclusively limited to trying to understand what those weapons are and to focus on them. So no attempt at looking at the broader issue. And are we likely to see a treaty that would be devoted to these broader issues? I don't believe so. And the reason why I don't believe so is because this is not the path that war regulation has taken in general over the last decades. We have kind of moved on from these large treaties that regulate war, and states are more likely today to associate themselves with like-minded states, perhaps states that have the same capabilities or share some basic values about how AI ought to be used, and develop guidelines as to their as to this use together. And this may not be binding, this might be a soft kind of instrument, and it might be rather limited in terms of its scope, involve only a few states and not 193 states. Okay, so perhaps I hope I have answered a lot of your questions, and maybe we can move to some the questions of the audience.
Thank you. So we actually have a lot of questions, typed in the chat box. So I will be having a very tough time picking questions. So, for the audience, please don't feel offended if your questions are not picked. Okay, so let me start with a question from Mr. John. So his questions, goes like this. Are robots able to recognize activities in opposition to system integrity? Even if insensitive to race, gender, age, or even moral status, I suppose that they can recognize incoming invaders through prediction of their behaviors from the past and present behaviors.
Is this question on the chat, Elchen?
Yes, there is a question about, I think this is more or less about a question of morality. And how technology can apply to decide on moral issues. How can, for example, robots and AI recognize, for example, facial recognition technology? How can technologies be applied to recognize civilians or even invaders? Would it be any, for example, what do you think, let me rephrase in this way. What do you think is the most urgent or important moral issue for the use of such kind of technology?
So I think it's very important, this idea of recognizing the adversary, recognizing the enemy, predicting an invasion. These are two different things actually, because one of them has to do with being able to identify a person. Is this person an enemy, and is he lawfully or she lawfully targetable? And again, a lot of questions go into this, of course, gender and age and height potentially, and being carrying a weapon. And there's these things that you can train a computer system to identify. And then hopefully, I mean, I don't know, hopefully actually, but at some point there might be a way for the computer to do this process on its own with the use of more sophisticated AI, right? To kind of go into this process of identifying the enemy and a potential target on its own. I don't know if this is what we should strive to, but this is, I think, the way in which AI can definitely be used. And as to predicting an invasion, here it would be about monitoring, again, messaging and attitudes in the enemy using AI-powered tools, and also some of the more traditional tools that are being used by states, and being able to anticipate such a movement in real time. Not even if it's not visible to the naked eye, the use of AI-powered tools can help detect these threats before they become operative.
Okay, so we have a question from Ms. Michelle Choi concerning U.S.-China trade war, another type of war. But I think this question is very interesting. So she asked whether the U.S.-China trade war is affecting the development of AI on security affairs. If yes, how? I think this is kind of relevant to the current situation involving Huawei. And well, I wonder whether you have any thoughts about this.
There's no doubt in my mind that the trade war, and I would say even the antagonism that has now been, I think, exacerbated by COVID-19 between China and the United States, this has affected the trade war, and it will also affect the AI arms race. There's no doubt to me that all these things are utterly connected. Just like we are likely to see the trade war intensifying as a result of what's happening now with COVID and the kind of like a war of narrative and responsibility between the US and China, this is also likely to exacerbate and make this AI competition even more prominent. So I don't see it getting better. If anything, because of the heightened rhetoric, I see it getting worse.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. We're having more questions coming up. I'm really having a very tough time. So we got a question from Ernest Southworth, who is currently a PhD student doing research on AI creativity. And so one of his questions is about whether current, he commented like this: current AI is replicant in practice. It bases on algorithm and in making decisions. So this algorithm are based on initial human programming parameters. So his question is whether this will affect the conclusion that AI can make war more humane. So this kind of war can be sort of decided by algorithm, whether it's a very positive development or not. Let's say programming war, whether programming war itself would be a positive development or making warfare more humane.
Chen, this reminds me of the debate that is always out there about whether the laws of war, by acknowledging the fact that wars do happen and trying to regulate them and have not legitimized war. In other words, by acknowledging that wars are out there and regulating them, doesn't that in a way make wars more acceptable, and the killing of civilians is not actually being accepted by the law to some extent? So this is what this debate reminds me of, right? I don't think we can talk about is AI only good or is AI only bad? I also don't think we can go backwards. We have to deal with the reality. And the reality is that states are developing those capabilities, and unless we try to understand them and understand the whole, how they interact with each other as a whole, and not necessarily in a piecemeal approach, we are going to miss out. And I think states would be, even those who reject these uses of AI, have to consider how they are going to impact their military operations going forward. And I think here, this idea of knowing your enemy, right? What I presented as knowing your enemy, and it's not really intelligence gathering. It goes beyond intelligence gathering. This is kind of like a non-intrusive way. Think about it. You don't intrude into the systems of the enemy. You don't do anything that is actually kind of offensive, or forget kinetic. It's not even psychological warfare in the sense that you're not even trying to influence your enemy. It's just using the tools that enable you to analyze what your enemy is thinking, what is going on in the enemy's society at the moment and within its leadership. So it's not psychological warfare, it's not spying, it's real time, it is, and all the tools needed to do this are already out there. So if a state doesn't realize that this is what's happening and it's being analyzed in this way, it will miss out. So even if you don't do it yourself, you must understand that these non-intrusive methods can very easily be taken from the civilian world and implemented in a military security context.
Great. So let's move on to the next question from Mr. Larry Lewis. In the UN Convention for Certain Conventional Weapons, CCW, some states have discussed how AI can be used to better comply with international humanitarian law and have humanitarian benefits. But these statements have not been matched by national level investments to see this in practice. How can researchers work with states and within forums such as the UNCCW to help encourage such investment?
Thank you. This is a fantastic question from Larry Lewis. Hello, Larry. Thank you for the question. This is exactly the problem. Okay, so Larry Lewis is not putting the finger on precisely what is going on. So most of the time, this discussion of whether AI can be used to better comply with IHL, with international humanitarian law, as opposed to being more prone to violations. So perhaps the AI-powered system will make fewer mistakes if you inculcate, if you teach the system, or if the system is able to do it on its own, perhaps it will comply even better than a regular soldier or a regular activating a traditional weapon will. So there is a potential here for enhanced compliance with the law. And yet, even when this conversation does take place, and it doesn't take place that often, I have to say, and Larry knows this, this is not being translated into any kind of policies. And so Larry is asking what else can be done. So first of all, we need to vote to make it heard, right? To have a voice and say that this can be done, and encourage states to invest in that alongside all of the other investments in AI. I think state researchers should work with states. I think you're absolutely right on this. Publicize their findings, and there should be a growing body of scholarship on these aspects, not just about the bad aspect of human enhancement, but also about the positive aspect on compliance with the law. It has to be looking at all of these facets, and until now, it has not been happening. So I think the solution is in research and in dialogue. Absolutely agree with you.
Okay, my colleague Brian Tan has a question about DARPA's Explainable AI Initiative. So he wants to hear your thoughts about this initiative, as well as many private sector NGO initiatives against AI for autonomous weapons.
Okay, so the two types of initiatives, they kind of like look at two different sides of AI, right? Explainable AI is about allowing computers to be able somehow to explain to the end users how they got to a particular outcome. So this is when the computer is potentially working on its own using a sophisticated super intelligence, and then the end user being like, okay, this sounds like an interesting outcome, but how do I know how the computer got there? So explainable AI is about allowing the system to share with the end user some of the processes that led to this outcome. It is potentially very, very important because it can enhance trust in AI and limit this black box effect, which is like, okay, since I don't know how the computer got there, I would rather not use this insight. So what this the way I see it is that explainable AI is, if it works out, is likely to gain the trust of the skeptics and enhance reliance on AI. Now, on the other hand, you have all these NGOs, right, as you mentioned, that are working against this because they are worried and they want to point to the dangers. And again, that is perfectly legitimate. All I'm saying is that I don't want this to be the sole conversation. I don't want this conversation about the dangers and the weaknesses to take over the discourse for much longer, because we are overlooking the potential, the positive impacts, and by overlooking the positive impacts, ultimately, we are letting AI do exactly what we don't want it to do, which is hurt security and enhance errors and bias, etc., etc. And we don't want to get there. We need to stop that. And in order to stop that, you need to look at this holistic aspect and at this civilian-military divide.
Great. So seems that we're running out of time, but I would like to have one more question. This is a question from Jamie Chen. If we want to protect ourselves from AI information warfare, I think I think information warfare is very important. So the question is about information warfare and social media. Does it mean that countries should restrict information sharing through the web or social media in order to minimize the risk? Do you see this trend come along soon?
So this is a good question, right? Because without data, there can be no AI, no processing of data on a grand scale. So AI, the quality of AI is only as good as the quality of the data that it has, and I think we've heard that many, many times. So the point here is that could it be that we can minimize AI or the negative impact of AI or the disruptive effect of AI by limiting access to data? And here I want to say I'm not sure that this is the way to go, because states have ways to gain access to this data. Even if it's not voluntarily shared, unfortunately, it will be accessed using other means. And I think this is, it's best to regulate the use of AI and to really think about how to channel AI in positive ways. I'm not sure that restricting information sharing is the way to go. But I could be wrong on this, and I'm happy to hear other views. But thank you so much. I think we're out of time, right?
Yeah, we have already run out of time, but we still have questions. So for those who have questions, I encourage you to contact Daphné directly, or if chance permitting, you can invite her to do another webinar on this fascinating topic. So thank you so much, Daphné, for giving this talk, and I feel much secured after hearing your thoughts. Because you know what the situation is going on, pandemic, the rapid development, technology. It seems to me that everybody is very anxious. People worry about whether there will be, we already have trade war with financial, war as well. So in addition to those, let's call it invisible wars, will there be another, real war in the future? But I feel like much better after hearing your talk, because it seems to me that we are already thinking about really important tech issues, moral issues concerning the occurrence of the next war, but hope that we can prevent the next war from being occurred, and of course we can use AI and a whole bunch of technologies. Thank you so much, Daphné. Stay healthy and well.
Same with you. Bye-bye.